I don't know whether you can see it that clearly. Do you know that the painter? Do you know the painting? That's Paul Gauguin. What he called his life's masterpiece. During 1898, Gauguin went through a major personal crisis. He couldn't paint for 6 months. He had a painter's block, I think is what we call it. And his life became broken into so many pieces. So this Paris stockbroker escaped the brokenness of his life and went in search of answers to the questions that he was wrestling with. He found himself amongst the Polynesians in Tahiti. And there he wrestled with those questions. And the canvas, which, as I say, he regarded as his life's masterpiece, was the result of his searching. You can see his questions not very well on the top left-hand side there, in the corner. Look at the painting from the perspective of the infant in the bottom right to the old woman far left. The questions of mortality, says Gauguin, come to us from cradle to grave. And those questions, top left-hand corner, excuse my French, d'où venons-nous, que sommes-nous, où allons-nous? Where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? Those are the kind of questions we ask, are they not? Maybe late at night when we're falling off to sleep, or waiting in the pre-op room for some surgery, or maybe standing at the graveside of a friend, of a loved one. Where do I come from? Who am I? Where am I going? Over these Sunday evenings, we've been listening to Jesus explore precisely those fundamental issues at the heart of our human existence in what we've called his messages from the mountain. And here we are in the final paragraphs of Matthew 7 with this oh so simple illustration of the house which God builds. The house music. From verse 13 of the chapter, Jesus has been inviting people to follow him, to become part of the kingdom of God. Remember what he says, enter by the narrow gate, walk the narrow road, join a small crowd on the way to life with God, now and forever. That's the invitation. And see, these are the people who have found answers to the questions. Where do we come from? Who am I? Where are we going? But along that narrow path that leads to life, Jesus says, there are some red warning flags. First, there'll be false teachers who look and sound like sheep, but in fact, they're wolves. They want to drag people away from the kingdom of heaven. And then there's the red flag of false followers who say all the right things, but in their hearts they don't know. They don't know Jesus the King personally, and they won't make it into the kingdom of heaven. The third red flag is the one that we see tonight. There are people on the journey who, on the surface, appear to be following Jesus. They listen to his words. For all the world, it's as if they're in the kingdom. But then the storms of life hit. And those storms expose how flaky their faith actually is. And they will fall, says Jesus, with a great crash. All right. Firstly, think with me about the illustration that Jesus uses there. Often the best illustrations of a preacher are drawn from their own real life context. And I suspect this one about house building comes right out of Jesus' own experience, personally. He grew up, didn't he, in a carpenter's shop in Nazareth. Joseph and Sons was the name outside the carpenter's door. So he knows a thing or two about construction, about angles and surveyors. He probably helped put up a house or two in his time. He knew the difference between a quality or a cowboy builder. He knew that someone could make a quick profit by putting something up on a sandy bed as opposed to going deep. Or you could take the shortcut and get your walls on your roof up no time. Or you could excavate. You could put in the long, back-breaking hours. Go the long way around and get it right. However, the story that Jesus tells is not just for architects, for contractors, for carpenters. It's for you and me. Because building a house is simply an analogy in the illustration Jesus uses for building a life. The point is this: the foundation on which you choose to build your life is absolutely crucial. I mean, just stop and think for a moment about the house that you may live in. If I asked you to describe that house tonight to me, you most likely tell me something about the location of the house, the color of it, the design features maybe, the square footage, if you knew that, the size of the plot, the numbers of bedrooms and bathrooms, the layout of the garden. But you probably wouldn't tell me much, if anything at all, about the foundation, because you probably know nothing about it. Yet it is the foundation that Jesus says makes all the difference in the house. Of course, in the illustration about the two houses, initially there is nothing to distinguish between them. They are probably located not far from each other, because when the hurricane comes, it hits both houses at the same time. They may well, therefore, have looked identical, even built with the same materials. But it's those very similarities which make the illustration so punchy, so effective. Because Jesus wants to connect with an audience that's been, what? Listening to him speak. And so as he brings this message to a close, he connects with them by saying, do you want to build a successful life? Then build it on my words. And the comparison in the illustration is that both these builders hear his words. They've been listening to his Sermon on the Mount with his message about how to enter the kingdom of God and know God. They have both heard the gospel. On the surface then, to a casual observer, they would not have noticed any difference between these builders or these buildings. So you see, the comparison of the illustration is not between a Christian on the one hand and an atheist on the other. No. Both are members of the visible church. Both read their Bible. Both go to church. Both listen to sermons. Both have their children in the youth group. The only difference is the contrast in just one area, the foundations on which they have been building. And by foundations, Jesus means not the amount of knowledge they have acquired over the years, but what they have done with what they hear. Has it been a case of in one ear, out of the other? Or in one ear, and down here into life itself? You see, in the illustration Jesus uses, hearing and doing are two very different things. It's the difference between, says Jesus, building on the sand or the rock. The wise contractor, the sensible builder, hears the words of Jesus and what? Puts them into practice. The foolish cowboy builder doesn't. For obedience to Jesus is what separates Sandy Man from Rocky. Because obedience tests not just what I believe in life, but who I believe in life. Am I prepared to trust Jesus when his wisdom, when his teaching cuts right across the wisdom of my culture, the advice of my parents, the views of my peers? When Jesus tells me, for example, to love my enemies, do I trust him enough to follow through on that? When Jesus tells me not to divorce my marriage partner, do I believe he knows best at that point? When he says to me, you can serve God or mammon, but you can't serve both, do I obey his teaching when he says to me, don't worry, seek God's kingdom first? Do I obey what Jesus says to me when to do so may leave me without a job, without a relationship, without friends? Not do I read Jesus' words, do I memorize Jesus' words, but do I obey Jesus' words? Is Jesus' word in charge of the way I make my life decisions? Is his truth the thing that balances my priorities? You see, obedience is the key. Doing what he says. Now, let's be clear. God's kingdom is a kingdom of grace. No one enters it by being obedient. But equally, no one enters the kingdom of God unless they're obedient. Because it's a narrow gate and a narrow way. In the kingdom of God, obedience is the fruit of my faith in Jesus. Not its root, but it's there. For I'm saved by grace, not by obedience. But grace in my life results in obedience. Otherwise it's cheap grace. And I think that cheap grace is often the scourge of the contemporary church. What's cheap grace? Cheap grace is faith without a cross, discipleship without repentance, blessing without confession, heaven without hell, hearing without doing. And you only know whether you've been building on fake grace or the real thing when the storms hit. And not until then. It's then that the sandy house and the rocky house are very obviously different. Oh, by the way, Jesus says, storms will come. There's no stopping them. Some storms in our life will come with warning, advance notice. Others will blow in suddenly. But they will come. And when the storms of life come, they will test what is under your feet. They'll test the foundations of your life. They'll test what's hidden from view, what no one else can see. They'll examine what's beneath you and reveal what you've been building on. You see, in the illustration that Jesus tells, it's then, at that point, in the face of the storm, that the comparisons and the contrasts between these two buildings produce very different consequences. Maybe the old Sunday school song can help us here. Do you know it? The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock. And the rain came tumbling down. Oh, the rain came down and the floods came up. The rain came down and the floods came up. And you can do the hand actions as well if you want to. The rain came down and the floods came up, and the wise man's house stood firm. Together. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. And the rain came tumbling down. Oh, the rain came down and the floods came up. The rain came down and the floods came up. The rain came down and the floods came up. And the foolish man's house went splat. You know, we can't do any better than the old Sunday school song. For the illustration that Jesus uses becomes the explanation that Jesus gives. The wise man built his house upon the rock and survived the storm because, explanation, he had solid foundations. Whereas the foolish man didn't survive the storm because he'd built his house upon sandy foundations. That is Jesus' explanation of life. A life built on answers to the questions: where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? You see, to live life is to build a life. Every one of us in the room tonight is building something: a family, a career, a reputation, a worldview. We are builders. But the fool, says Jesus, as he explains his little story, the fool hasn't built his life on obeying Jesus. He's turned Jesus' words, perhaps, into a kind of nice, cozy religion. Being a nice person, being kind, attending church, I'm as good as the next person sort of thing. The wise man, on the other hand, has heard Jesus' words, and he has really got the message. He understands that Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, isn't offering a gospel that makes people nicer. The message from the mountain is not a self-improvement course to make life better for ourselves. No, Jesus is offering to completely rebuild my life and yours. That's the point of the Sermon on the Mount. And it was the discovery that the great Christian apologist C.S. Lewis made after many years of struggling. One night in his rooms at Magdalen College, he gave in. He comments in his autobiography, he gave in, the most reluctant convert in all of England. And later, as his Christian faith began to be put together, C.S. Lewis realized just how radical the reconstruction job God was wanting to do on his life actually was. He comments in his autobiography, when I became a Christian, I thought that what God was going to do was come into my life with a little spring clean. Get the duster out here and dust away a bit of the mess, maybe a little cleaning up job. But actually, says Lewis, I soon began to realize that God was intent on a complete demolition and rebuild. Walls were being knocked down. Extensions were arriving. The roof was off. That's the message of the Sermon on the Mount. The gospel isn't about making yourself better. It's about having your life completely redesigned by God through the truth of Jesus. Of course, there are lots of other people who tried to build themselves a life with no religion involved, with no reference to faith of any kind. They prefer to build on the foundation of what we call relativism. The idea that no one has an angle on the truth, that you can believe anything you want. You do your thing, I'll do mine. I got my house over here, you've got yours over there. We'll leave each other alone. You're doing well, so am I. Do you know your boy bands? Boyzone, this line. No matter what they tell us, no matter what they do, no matter what they teach us, what we believe is true. That's relativism. I decide what's true. It's good for me. But the foundation of relativism is as foolish and fatal as the foundation of religion without a personal relationship to God. Because for the relativist, there are absolutely no absolutes. There is no word from God to us in Jesus to be obeyed. There is no truth that applies to everyone, everywhere, and for all time. There are absolutely no absolutes, says the relativist. But wait a minute. Listen to the logic of relativism. There are no absolutes, they say, except the absolute that there are no absolutes. Do you see how shaky and sandy that foundation is? For the claim that everything is relative is itself an absolute claim. Or we could spend all night describing the foundations that other people build life upon. If it's not relativism, then it's materialism. People build their life, don't they, on success, on health, on money, on the career. But in the end, it's all the same, says Jesus, religion, relativism, materialism, because when the storm comes, crash. There's no foundation. There's no depth. Sometimes, as we know, the storm roars in and we're pounded by sickness. Maybe we're beginning to feel our age, and that discourages us no end. Times like those reveal the foundations of a person's life. Sometimes the storm is a crushing personal loss. We may lose a job that not only provides income, but also provides us with self-esteem and security. Now, listen again, folks. I'm not saying that obedience to Jesus' words is somehow a protection from the troubles, from the storms. Christians are not given a free pass. Obedience to Jesus, rather, is a protection in the troubles, in the storm. Yeah, we may lose some windows along the way. The house of our life may be shaken. But, says Jesus, it will not collapse and will not be swept away. So you think about all the time that maybe over the years you have invested in laying your biblical foundation, in putting into practice what Jesus has said. Let me tell you, it'll pay off. If you haven't already seen the results and benefits, I can assure you that one day you will. For building on the rock is the best flood insurance that you can ever invest in. Because those storms will come and they will go. Right now, you're either in a trial, you're coming out of a trial, or you're entering into a trial. Nevertheless, if we've built our life upon the foundation of Christ and His Word, hearing and doing it, we have nothing to fear. We will stand. And that decision that people make not to act on Jesus' words, for whatever reason, is the decision to live by someone else's words. For we all live by someone's words. Every one of us is building a life according to some scheme, according to some design or other. We don't build at random. Every one of us has a worldview or a philosophy. And so the question of our mortality at the heart of human existence is this: who or what is your foundation? Why did the foolish man build his house on the sand? Well, maybe he miscalculated the weather. He thought every day was going to be sunshine. He thought his life was always going to be smooth. So he figured a sand dune would do as a foundation. It's easier and faster to build on the sand. And says Jesus by analogy, the same is true when it comes to the foundation of your life. It's easier to go with the crowd. It takes less time and energy if you simply maintain a superficial faith. And frankly, most of the time, who can tell the difference anyway? It's easier to just show up at church for an hour a week than it is to develop spiritual depth, spiritual roots. But there's only one problem with that mentality, says Jesus. There's a storm coming. Do you know what many Christians do when it starts raining? They try to change foundations. When the sky gets dark and the winds pick up and the rain begins to pour, they pick up the telephone maybe. They call the most spiritual people they know and they say, hey, help me build a new foundation under my house. It's falling apart. But I want to tell you, straight and true tonight, you cannot change foundations when you're in the middle of a storm. You have to lay your foundations before the storm comes, so that when the rain, the floods, and the winds arrive, your house is secure. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and bare against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Megale is the word in the Greek. Mega, massive, a great crash. Most of us tonight will be old enough, not all of us, but most of us will be old enough to remember what Michael Fish, the BBC weatherman, said as he was giving the forecast for the day. It was Monday, October the 15th, 1987. I remember it well. I was staying in a very wooded, leafy suburb in a Christian conference center near Cobham. Michael Fish told us, the nation, that he had a phone call from a lady in Wales that morning to say that there was a hurricane on the way. Michael Fish, in front of the camera, laughed and said, oh, she needn't worry. It might be a bit breezy, but it'll blow through. That night in Cobham, I was terrified as I heard and saw literally trees being ripped out of the ground as those 115-mile-per-hour winds ripped through the south of England. 18 people died. Roads and railways were closed for days and weeks. It took me virtually the whole week to get back to Southampton. There's a storm coming, says Jesus. And it's bigger than the great weather storm of 1987. There's a storm coming, says Jesus, and it's bigger than the financial crash of the global markets in 2008. Because, you see, if the storms of ill health don't crash into your house, or the storm of a marriage breakup doesn't crash into your house, or the storm of unemployment doesn't crash into your house, then the storm of death will blow your house down. And after that, the biggest storm of all, the judgment of God. And if I've not been putting Jesus' words into practice, the house of my life will fall with a great crash. You see, this means that in the explanation that Jesus gives in this story, the house is utterly destroyed. It is a great crash. There is nothing left to show for the life lived within this house. There is nothing left of the hopes and dreams and plans and efforts and work or anything, because everything is destroyed, everything swept away as if it had never existed. What is this a picture of? This is a picture, surely, of what will happen to every person who builds their life on anything but Jesus and the gospel. For you may weather the storms of ill health or unemployment or a marriage breakup, but there is a day coming when every person, every single one of us will face God in the judgment. You see, you can have joined the church in your life and still crash then. You can have been baptized in your life, but you will still crash then. You can be a good person, at least in the eyes of other people, and still crash then. You can build your house on religion, and you'll still crash then. You can build your house on atheism, on human wisdom, on human philosophies, and anything else you can name, and yet you will still crash then. Says Jesus, it fell, the house, with a great crash. And then, if you look at your Bibles, at that point in the text of Matthew 7, end of. Jesus finishes. Sermon over. That's it. No more. He simply walks off the stage. And so as we finish, the conclusion we draw. The conclusion we draw. I suppose the way that Matthew leaves the story hanging there, he wants the reader, the listener, to end the story for themselves. It fell, did the house, with a great crash. And Jesus walks off. Over to you. What do you make of this? Perhaps better, what do you make of Jesus? What conclusion do you draw about Jesus? Because discipleship means taking Jesus' words seriously because we take him seriously. Matthew, in his gospel, actually tells us the conclusion the crowds drew, what they thought. Listen, verse 28. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. Oh, the rabbis, the teachers of the law, the scribes, they were boring, they were predictable, they were irrelevant. That's the conclusion the crowds drew about the teaching of the scribes and the Pharisees. I suppose that's a typical reaction of the average person in our culture to God talk in the church today. Boring. Utterly irrelevant. And people sit there, don't they, in church, counting the light bulbs, or if they're in a grand church building, the organ pipes, or maybe the ladies' hats, or even playing sermon cricket. You've done that in your life before? Sermon cricket, you know, that's out. When the preacher does that in the sermon, that's out. If he does this, that's a 6. If he goes like this, that's a 4. I've done that. In my teenage years, I played sermon cricket because the preacher is boring. And I've got to get through this sermon, so I'm going to play England versus the West Indies. And every time the preacher goes like that, someone's out. Someone walks. It's a wicket. If the preacher goes like that, he gets excited. That's a 6. If he goes like that, it's a 4. Why, says the boy to his mum, why do we have all these flags in church? Well, son, those are for all the people who died in the services. Says the boy, was it in the morning or the evening service, mum? Nobody fell asleep. Nobody died when Jesus spoke, because there was something different about him. He spoke with authority. He didn't simply rehash what other preachers, other teachers of the law had said. That was the method of the teachers of the law in the first century. They simply repeated what the rabbis were saying. Not Jesus. No. He quoted the law. He said, you have heard it said, but I say to you. Jesus has unique authority. That's what the crowds realized. That's the conclusion that they came to. He has unique authority. He's not like anyone else. And the authority of the words of Jesus came from the authority of the person of Jesus, who he is. So here, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus presents himself as the one who speaks as God. He not only speaks as God, but he acts as God. In the next chapter, we're finishing tonight in Matthew, but in the next chapter, chapter 8, Jesus heals a man. He acts as God. He speaks as God, and he judges as God. So when at the end of time, every one of us comes to judgment, who has the authority on that day? Jesus says, I do. In the previous paragraph we looked at a couple of weeks ago, did you notice what Jesus said? Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord. They'll say to him, Jesus, but I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Do you see what he's saying? Jesus claims the right to admit or exclude people from the kingdom of God. His words matter. They have ultimate authority. For he speaks as God, he acts as God, and he will judge as God because he is God. Not only does Jesus have authority to judge, he has authority to save. For a life built on him, as his story says, a life built on him and his words is the only foundation which is going to save the house of my life when that storm comes. When death and ultimate judgment comes. The destiny of every human being, says Jesus, is in my hands. So if we trust him, we're safe. If we don't trust him and obey his words, we'll be blown away. That is the final challenge of the Sermon on the Mount. The teaching, the words of Jesus matter eternally. So, what conclusion have we drawn? For this sermon is a summons to renounce the prevailing culture in which we live, to become countercultural, different, radical, salt and light. Says Jesus, your righteousness in the kingdom of God will be deeper because it is internal righteousness. Your love in the kingdom of God will be broader because it embraces even your enemies. Your piety in the kingdom of God will be real, not fake. Your treasure in heaven. Your master, God. Your ambition, the kingdom. Follow the crowd? Or follow Jesus? Follow the crowd, and there'll be a great crash. So what are my foundations? Sand or rock? Let's pray. Lord, help us to really hear and then follow through on Jesus' words. Thank you that his words matter eternally. Thank you that he, in his own life, answers for all who come to him the questions of our frail human existence. Where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? Thank you, God, that as we trust Jesus and his gospel, he answers those questions for us. He takes the storm of death, and as the resurrection and the life offers us hope in the face of that storm, he takes our judgment, dying in our place. And in the face of that final judgment, we need not fear. So may we build our lives today, always, on the rock that is Jesus. May our hope be built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. Amen.